My family is trying to make my favorite sister the star of my wedding. I'm planning my revenge. I'm getting married, and my family insists that my golden child sister be the one to walk down the aisle in white. So here I am, seizing the chance for a little revenge by sharing this tale while on vacation. Writing it down feels surprisingly therapeutic. My husband is more excited about this story than the exotic cocktails here at the resort. I'm using a throwaway account because I don't personally use Reddit, and my spouse, a Reddit enthusiast, prefers to keep this off his profile. He suggested that since it's my family drama, I should be the narrator, though he's right here offering his support. I'm not a lawyer, so here's my disclaimer. I do not give permission for this to be reposted anywhere else. It's important to understand the background that led to such intense reactions from us. I apologize for the long read, but it's necessary to explain how favoritism has escalated over the years. My parents have always shown a blatant preference for my sister over me. For example, if she accused me of something, my parents would instantly take her side and I'd be the one getting punished, even if I had solid evidence to the contrary. Their punishments for her were consistently lighter, often accompanied by a lecture directed at me. Even on my birthdays, we had to have the cake flavor she liked. Preferences were never in my favor. Statistics show that sibling rivalry and perceived parental favoritism can have long-lasting psychological effects, with nearly 30% of such cases resulting in prolonged adult sibling estrangement. Growing up, my parents always feigned ignorance of my dislikes, invariably leaning towards my sister's choices. Even during events meant to celebrate me, she grew up coddled and resentful towards me, using me as her scapegoat. And as we hit our early teens, our conflicts intensified significantly. I can't pinpoint exactly what happened, but my sister suddenly found herself without friends, and her behavior took a turn for the worse. Whether her friends moved away or grew tired of her mean streak, I'm not sure. We were never close, and my parents only highlighted her achievements, carefully omitting any trouble she faced. In contrast, they seemed to take delight in using my shortcomings as fodder for criticism. At our school, I noticed she was alone, no longer surrounded by the camaraderie she once had. Meanwhile, I enjoyed a fair bit of popularity, something that didn't go unnoticed by her. My role in her life quickly shifted from an occasional target to someone she perceived as a threat that needed to be neutralized at all costs. Her tactics escalated. She started fabricating more accusations against me and even implicated my friends in various misdemeanors. Consequently, my parents curtailed my social interactions. Their excuses ranging from questioning my friend's character based on my sister's accusations to guilt tripping me about not spending enough time with family and emulating my sister's supposedly ideal behavior. My extended family became my refuge from this isolation. Despite slight age differences, I bonded well with my cousins, most of whom lived nearby. On one occasion, they invited me to an event, but I had to decline, blurting out without much thought that I wasn't allowed to socialize because my sister had no friends. This revelation seemed to shock the adults and later led to a confrontation with my parents. Although I ended up grounded for a month, accused of lying and having nowhere to go, it was a turning point. Following that incident, my parents granted me a bit more freedom and my sister transferred to a different school, a change she pleaded for, possibly embarrassed by our relatives knowing about her lack of friends. The new school was more expensive due to its distance, but my parents agreed without hesitation. There, she managed to make new friends, but the dynamic between us never fully returned to the casual disregard of the past. I believe she resented that I had exposed her social struggles to the family, and she maintained a simmering anger towards me, aware now of the influence she wielded in making my life challenging. My life remained difficult. Whenever her friends visited, they would harass me, and my parents dismissed it as harmless teasing. Due to their poor hospitality, I avoided inviting anyone over to avoid conflict, especially since my sister often falsely accused my friends of stealing, which my parents readily believed. The only solace I found was with my cousins, as my parents never dared mistreat our relatives, allowing me to build a close bond with them. During this tumultuous time, I started dating my first boyfriend. Despite pressure from my parents, I was adamant about keeping him away from our home. Unfortunately, we once separated during an outing, and he sought me out to report that my sister had made a pass at him. She had approached him wearing tight, inappropriate clothes, batting her eyelashes excessively, and speaking ill of me. while praising herself. Enraged, he quickly left to find me. Of course, my sister spun a different tale to our parents, claiming he had flirted with her, but she had rejected him, feigning moral superiority to protect me. My parents, predictably, sided with her, casting doubts on my boyfriend's character. Though he was far from perfect, I clung to him, partly out of spite. Reflecting on that period, I realized how the constant mistreatment had shaped me. I harbored deep resentment not just towards my sister, but also towards myself, coloring my teenage years with bitterness. Now, let's address appearances, a topic I've avoided because it seemed irrelevant. My sister often expressed affection through food, offering extra servings or buying sweets, which contributed to her being overweight, a trait shared with my parents. In contrast, I was, and still am, quite slim, sometimes as a consequence of being denied snacks as a form of punishment. However, it's important to note that personality matters more than weight. Despite her tactics, my sister's spoiled and unpleasant nature shone through. She never had to work for anything. Whatever she demanded, our parents provided. This extended to her clumsy attempts at flirting, which were as graceless as they were ineffective. Even in my insecure youth, I never believed my boyfriend would be tempted by her advances. Despite my efforts, my parents declared my boyfriend unsuitable and forbade our relationship. Struggling to comply, yet unwilling to let go, I continued to see him secretly until the inevitable breakup. A pattern soon emerged. I had another boyfriend, and once again, my sister accused him of flirting with her after he rejected her advances. Predictably, my parents took her side. When I pointed out the recurring issue, they concluded that I was incapable of making wise decisions and consistently chose poor partners. The strain of navigating what felt like a modern-day Romeo and Juliet scenario led to another relationship dissolving. In high school, this pattern of fleeting romances earned me an unfair reputation. I was labeled for being open to casual interactions but reluctant to commit, a narrative that fortunately never reached my parents or sister. During this time, my sister managed to bring a boyfriend home. He was celebrated and shown off until he suddenly wasn't around anymore. My parents used his brief presence to taunt me, asking why I couldn't find someone as remarkable as him. However, when he eventually deceived my sister, he was quickly labeled a scoundrel, yet the double standards persisted. My sister enjoyed more financial freedom, less restrictive curfews, and the liberty to go anywhere at any time while I was continuously constrained. Any protests about the fairness of these rules were met with excuses about her being older, or worse, accusations of my untrustworthiness based on my supposed poor judgment in friends and partners. As time moved towards my sister's high school graduation, the disparities grew. She had no scholarships, and her acceptance into a college, not particularly prestigious, was another moment of selective transparency from my parents. They only ever shared her successes, so I was left in the dark about her rejections or academic struggles. We celebrated whenever she managed a B, while my consistent good grades were downplayed as commonplace. No celebration needed, they said, because it was expected of me. Meanwhile, they promised to cover all of my sister's college expenses, making sure to create a spectacle of their support for her. Her departure for college promised some relief, though it hardly simplified my life. Every other weekend she returned, and inevitably, something would go missing from her room or another issue would arise, ensuring my life remained troubled. My curfews remained stringent. As my own graduation approached, my mother initiated a conversation about my future. Being a year younger than my sister, I was advised to start working immediately after high school. They suggested delaying any college plans until after my sister had graduated, citing financial constraints due to her tuition fees. Furthermore, if I chose to stay at home, I would be expected to pay rent, contribute to the bills, and cover all my personal expenses. When I brought up the possibility of taking out student loans, my mother's response was dismissive. She implied that my poor judgment would be a factor in deciding whether any college was worth the debt I might incur, a backhanded way of saying they didn't trust my decisions. I wondered silently how they could possibly prevent me from securing loans, but scholarships, unsurprisingly, were never discussed. They had never taken an interest in my academic achievements, let alone believed in my capabilities. I responded with a simple okay, not reacting as she might have anticipated. Perhaps she expected an outburst that would give them an excuse not to support my higher education at all. When my father later attempted to broach the subject, I maintained the same composed demeanor, expressing gratitude for their concern and acknowledging their perspective. Privately, I harbored no illusions about their intentions. Their neglect had stripped away any naive hopes I might have had about them financing my education. I knew they would find excuses not to invest in my future. However, unbeknownst to them, I had been quietly preparing for college on my own. My social life was minimal, affording me ample time to study. I saw higher education as my only escape, my chance for freedom. When graduation finally came, my efforts paid off. I secured a scholarship, a testament to my dedication, and a direct challenge to the low expectations my family had set for me. The university I secured wasn't Ivy League, nor was it specializing in law or medicine, but it was a respectable institution offering a full scholarship for a solid course. Anticipating objections from my sister, who would likely attempt to use our parents to hinder my plans, I strategically announced my success on social media while simultaneously informing my family. This way, they would be compelled to support my decision publicly, making it harder for them to backtrack without explaining to relatives why they opposed my departure. Initially, my parents even showed a hint of pride, boasting about my achievement. However, their tone changed once my sister weighed in, suddenly questioning if I truly wanted to pursue this path. They revealed that she was struggling in college, implying that if someone as capable as her was finding it tough, I would undoubtedly face greater hardships. Despite their doubts, I remained resolute. Though they were visibly displeased, there was little they could do to stop me. College became my sanctuary, a place where I began to find true happiness. I maintained contact with my parents, visiting during holidays, but since they weren't financially supporting me, I often cited financial constraints as a reason for not visiting more frequently. During this period, I avoided introducing any romantic interests to them. Meanwhile, my sister dropped out of college without graduating, a fact that under different circumstances would have been celebrated loudly. She moved back home, living rent-free, and started working at the same company as our mother, clearly a result of nepotism. As for me, I was nearing a sense of pride in my independence. Around this time, I met my future husband. He's the kind of person who doesn't just talk about what he'd do in a challenging situation, he actually does it. In contrast, I've often found myself meek, the type to lie awake regretting not speaking up or crafting the perfect comeback. I'm the one who cries out of frustration. My husband, on the other hand, is quick to respond and doesn't shy away from confronting or even escalating drama if necessary. If he doesn't react immediately to a slight, it's not because he's letting it go. He's probably plotting a more significant retaliation. Though my husband was keen on sharing our story on a nuclear revenge forum, he conceded that what we experienced wasn't quite at that level. People often misunderstood him when we first met, possibly attributing this to my reserved nature shaped by my upbringing. I simply wasn't used to someone who acted with such directness. He treats everyone with kindness, provided they do the same, and I deeply admire his ability to stand up in ways I've never met. As we planned our wedding, we agreed that our budget wouldn't stretch to a lavish ceremony. Instead, we prioritized spending on a dream honeymoon in Europe. We decided to hold the wedding in my hometown as his family was dispersed and mine was still largely local. The proximity allowed us to manage preparations during weekend visits, and our flexible work schedules meant we could extend our stays if needed. A few months into our engagement, we sent out our save the date cards. Predictably, this prompted my parents to insist on meeting my fiancé. Despite my reservations, part of me still doubted my parents' true nature due to the distance. I struggled to outright refuse. When I shared this with my husband, his disappointment was palpable, as if I had ruined his favorite holiday. But he was prepared. He had even purchased a high-quality recorder to discreetly capture any inappropriate behavior, determined to document any of my sister's usual antics. With a plan to tactfully reject any of her advances and record the evidence, he went to meet them on his own, filled with a mix of anticipation and resolve. He returned later, almost giddy, with the sheer volume of material he had gathered. "Babe, you wouldn't believe the things they said. There's so much we could do with this," he told me, excited by the prospect. "We can really turn the tables on them," my husband suggested. But despite my curiosity about the recording, he wisely advised me to hear him out first to avoid any misunderstandings. During his visit, instead of the expected flirting, my sister and parents had a different plan. They sat him down to criticize my judgment and proposed a shocking condition for financing our wedding. My sister would walk down the aisle first, dressed as a bride. Their reasoning was twisted. Apparently, it was only fair that my sister get to experience a wedding before me, complete with photos, a dress, and even her own cake. According to them, it was inappropriate for the younger sister to marry first. Now, my husband will share his part of. Hello, here's the indignant husband. There's nothing quite like the fury of a man who frequents revenge and justice forums when his partner is insulted. Despite my wife's portrayal of me as quick-witted, I was utterly dumbfounded when they seriously made such a ludicrous proposal. It felt like a bizarre gift, a scenario even mythical Troy would reconsider before accepting a second time. Once I collected myself, though initially tempted to unleash a barrage of retorts, a devilish strategy formed in my mind, urging me to play along. I claimed I needed time to discuss with my fiance and quickly excused myself before my true intentions could slip. Back to me, the wife. My husband returned with a smile, revealing the outrageous scheme my family concocted to make even my wedding day about my sister. He had the entire conversation recorded as shocked. I couldn't believe they would go to such lengths. I had thought the distance had softened their treatment of me, but this proved otherwise. Thankfully, my husband's focus on turning the situation to our advantage kept me from spiraling into despair. We indulged in a lively session brainstorming ways to outmaneuver them, tossing around ideas from the wildly absurd to the practically sound. Once we settled on a plan, we called his level-headed brother for a sanity check. Our scheme involved sending out 2 venue addresses and intentionally giving the wrong one to certain guests. His brother scolded us, though he admitted he couldn't dissuade us from seeking some form of revenge. He pointed out the complexities and legal risks involved with our more audacious ideas. Eventually, we opted for a safer route. Stick to the original plan, but hire security to restrict her access to the event. Of course, a simple denial of entry wouldn't satisfy our thirst for a more profound justice. My husband, taking the lead but ensuring I was in agreement with every step, revisited my parents to probe further. He feigned confusion over their proposal, pretending to consider their wish for family unity and their strategy to involve us financially in the wedding as a means to maintain control. He suggested a compromise, knowing well my aversion to conflict. He told them I would likely keep quiet if confronted with a shocking situation at the wedding, especially in front of a crowd due to my dislike of public disputes. Moreover, he insinuated that the emotional weight of the wedding might make me even less likely to react if they contributed financially, as I would feel obligated to show gratitude. This manipulation was designed to place me in an even tighter spot, making it difficult for me to voice any objections. His proposal seemed to work as he had hoped. Sister, upon hearing that she could still play a significant part in the wedding under the guise of financial support from our parents, literally jumped for joy like a child, while my parents appeared taken aback, yet tentatively accepting of this compromise. Crucially, my husband also claimed that due to my alleged history of poor judgment in past relationships, which purportedly made me distrustful and controlling, this entire scheme was my idea. He told them I insisted on overseeing every detail to ensure he wasn't cheating on me, which justified why none of our strategies could be documented or discussed outside of in-person conversations at their house. This set the stage for a complex game of deception, where my husband and I appeared to be manipulated by my parents and sister, while in reality, we were orchestrating the entire scenario. Over the following months, we played into their hands, or so they thought. My parents demanded a say in every aspect of the wedding, hoping to influence it without actually funding it. My husband would seemingly persuade me to compromise on details important to me, like the music and color palette, maintaining the illusion that I was under their control. However, we were indifferent about the ceremony itself, focusing instead on areas where we could subtly manipulate outcomes. For instance, during tastings for the wedding menu, we would initially choose the cheapest options. My husband would then bring my sister to casually try the selections, lamenting that it was a shame we couldn't opt for the best due to not wanting to exploit my parents' generosity. Predictably, this prompted my sister to insist that my parents should pay for the premium choices, which they did without hesitation. The same strategy was applied with the flowers and the photographer. My husband would express to my sister our decision to go with less desirable flowers, handing her a bouquet of the ones we actually wanted. Soon after, my parents would assure me They'd cover the cost for the preferred flowers, believing they were smoothing over a family. The wedding dress posed a minor challenge. Though the dress they selected wasn't to my taste and didn't suit me well, it wasn't outright hideous. We planned to agree in person and then choose another dress, but my mother unexpectedly texted me for confirmation, forcing us to carefully navigate our responses in writing. When we visited them, my husband played along, while my sister suggested sabotaging my preferred dress to force me into wearing their choice. He feigned agreement, ensuring all discussions remained verbal, avoiding any textual evidence of our true intention. We reinforced the illusion of my supposed control by having me respond whenever my sister attempted to message my husband. They fully bought into this narrative, cautious not to leave any written evidence that could contradict the image of me as controlling and neurotic, an idea which, given my usual meekness, I found ironically amusing. Despite the potential discomfort of being portrayed negatively, I encouraged him to continue. I guess my sense of humor sees the humor in such absurdity. Oh, and yes, my sister did attempt to flirt with him again. He played along, showing just enough hesitation to convince them he was on their side, though we never disclosed our plan to hire security. What's really amusing is that we initially considered a simple courthouse wedding to save for our honeymoon, yet we ended up orchestrating an elaborate, costly affair at my parents' expense. We jokingly referred to it as collecting back pay for emotional damages. I must admit, my husband seemed to relish the deception more than the actual wedding planning. There he was, the unlikely groom, eagerly spending his Saturdays discussing wedding details with my in-laws, a scenario I never imagined possible. As the wedding day approached, my family crafted a plan to ensure my sister could usurp my moment without my interference. They planned for her to arrive exactly when the bride typically would, ensuring I'd be oblivious until it was too late. Meanwhile, we had saved some fabric from alterations to my actual dress. My husband took this fabric to my parents' house where my sister still lived and presented it as proof that he had followed through on their scheme to ruin my preferred dress. He told them he needed to rush back to calm me down, promising my sister would see the outcome at the wedding. Initially, we kept the details of our actual security measures a secret, ensuring no leaks could sabotage our carefully laid plans. As the wedding guests arrived, they were greeted by a woman with a list of names, meticulously checking off attendees. We had positioned our security prominently, a man resembling a bodyguard who was instructed to be vigilant. It was only after my parents were seated that we subtly informed him to specifically bar my sister from entering, incentivizing him with a generous tip should he manage to keep our plan under wraps. The critical moment approached. My father, having received a text that my sister was less than 5 minutes away, signaled for the ceremony to start. Following his lead without question, my bridesmaids began their procession. Positioned at the doorway, my father appeared to be waiting for something or someone after everyone else had proceeded. Unbeknownst to the others, a friend of ours, not part of the wedding party but in on the scheme, kept me updated via text. This was necessary because it would have raised suspicions if my spouse or any bridesmaids were seen using their phones. This friend, primarily an ally of my husband, was more than willing to assist in orchestrating a bit of drama. As the bridal march began and my father settled back into his seat, I made my entrance. The sight of me caused his face to drain of color. He looked frantically over my shoulder, trying to spot my sister at the entrance, to no avail. His phone started ringing. It was her. Abruptly, he whispered, "Something came up," and left me standing alone at the altar amidst a murmur of shocked gasps. The friend, playing her part perfectly, loudly inquired what had happened. Feigning distress, I responded, "He said it wasn't supposed to be me walking down the aisle." Although I maintained composure, the words were partly true. I hadn't fully anticipated my father would actually walk away from me at the altar. My husband and I had planned for me to respond dramatically if he did, to ensure the impact of his actions was felt by all present. While I professed it was all an act, the reality was that a part of me was genuinely wounded by his readiness to abandon me. The sting of betrayal wasn't just part of our ruse, it was real, and I struggled to hold back tears. Then, capitalizing on the moment, the friend loudly pressed, "What did he mean by 'it shouldn't be you'?" Her voice carried, ensuring the question reached every corner of the room, sowing seeds of doubt and curiosity among the guests. "I will go and check," my friend declared, darting off to confront the security and prevent my dad from re-entering the ceremony or causing any further disruptions shortly after my mother also left the scene. During this commotion, my husband's father, who had been prepped for possible intervention, rushed over and grasped my arm reassuringly. His prompt arrival brought a smile to my face, even as I walked down the aisle amidst the hushed whispers of the crowd, some of whom had stepped out. What the fuss was about? By the time I reached my husband, the mood lightened. He joked that my convincingly distressed expression deserved, promising that he would make sure those responsible felt. With a chuckle, he assured me everything would be all right, and we proceeded to tie the knot without further incident. Notably, my parents did not return for the ceremony. Throughout the celebration, I noticed many guests briefly leaving and then returning, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. At one point, my husband was pulled aside by someone whispering in his ear. He returned after a short while with a grave expression, only to lean in and whisper that he struggled to maintain his composure and nearly burst into laughter. Here is what unfolded, pieced together from accounts by friends, relatives, the security guard, and my husband. My sister had indeed arrived, clad in a bridal gown, intent on disrupting the proceeding. As planned, our security firmly denied her entry, informing her that she must be at the wrong venue since the bride was already inside. We had promised the guard a generous tip, and he earned it by standing his ground, even as my father tried to intimidate him, threatening to call the police. The security, unfazed, welcomed the suggestion, confident in his role and the legality of his action. Realizing the futility of his efforts and that it was too late to change anything, my father desperately argued for my sister's admission. That's when my friend arrived, causing a scene by loudly denouncing my sister and demanding explanations, effectively stalling any further attempts by my family to salvage their plan. Soon after, my mother and others arrived, witnessing the chaos. By then, the original wedding scheme had thoroughly unraveled, leaving my parents with nothing to do but attempt damage control as more guests became aware of the debacle, some vocally criticizing them for their part in the orchestration. In a desperate attempt to shift blame, my parents and sister accused my husband of orchestrating the entire debacle. When he received the call and arrived, he put on his best look of bewildered innocence. With a flair for dramatics, he vehemently denied any involvement in the ludicrous plan they described. Quoting his own words in jest, gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss, he challenged them to produce any evidence of his supposed agreement. Predictably, they couldn't present anything concrete. The messages they scrambled to show only covered routine wedding decisions. Meanwhile, my sister's reaction escalated dramatically. She was on the floor, kicking and screaming like a child in a tantrum, while my father, visibly furious and restrained by security, looked as if he was on the brink of physical confrontation. My husband, with a hint of sarcasm, remarked on the convenience of their lack of written evidence, reiterating the absurdity of him ever consenting to such a farce. He then launched into a scathing critique of their parenting before returning to me, assuring that he wouldn't let their deceitful tactics ruin our wedding. The gathered crowd was skeptical of my family's claims. Despite the venue being equipped with security cameras, the management refused to release the footage, citing it was only for security purposes. However, some guests had recorded parts of the unfolding drama, capturing the moment everyone turned against my parents and sister. Witnessing them finally getting a dose of their own medicine felt like one of the best wedding gifts, after years of enduring false accusations and disbelief. As the spectacle continued, my sister remained on the floor, wailing and screaming, while my mother wept, and my father fluctuated between rage and pale shock. Guests murmured among themselves, questioning the logic of my husband's alleged involvement and the bizarre desire for my sister to disrupt my wedding in such a manner. Confronted with a lack of plausible explanations and growing scrutiny, my parents eventually were advised to leave the venue. My father had to physically lift my sister off the floor as they made their exit. Throughout the night, guests avoided discussing the incident directly with me, perhaps out of respect for my role as the bride. Despite the underlying tensions, there was a concerted effort to maintain a friendly, celebratory atmosphere, making the day memorable for all the right reasons. After the initial tumult, my husband jokingly suggested that the expensive food we served at the wedding helped lighten the mood, as everyone seemed to enjoy themselves despite the earlier drama. He maintained his feigned anger for a short while before breaking into smiles again. After the reception, we headed to the hotel to rest up before embarking on our honeymoon. Speaking of which, we decided against letting my parents pay for our plane ticket, fearing they might try to cancel them as a last-ditch effort to interfere. Throughout this whole ordeal, my family tried repeatedly to contact me. I ignored their calls, following my husband's advice to keep everything in writing, a wise move as it turned out. Eventually, my sister sent a message blaming me for her public humiliation, calling my husband a deceitful manipulator and wishing infidelity upon me, which she was bizarrely confident about. Her message was so outlandish that my husband wanted to frame it as a bizarre memento. In response, my husband took over, screenshotting the call logs, my sister's message, and texts from my parents pleading for me to answer the phone. He then posted all of this to our family group chat, continuing to deny any agreement to their plans and even threatened to sue for slander and harassment. He shared additional screenshots where they had insulted him and made threats, portraying himself as the victim of their continued torment. His final message in the chat pleaded with the family to prevent my parents from further interference, especially from trying to disrupt our honeymoon. The family assured him they would handle the situation, and since then, enjoyed some peace. My husband didn't hold back when he confronted my sister later, thoroughly upbraiding her for her actions, and recounted the exchange to another relative. Time will tell if this quiet, despite wishing for a normal, loving family presence at my wedding. I'm somewhat relieved that their attempt to ruin the inability to affect some brought some issues into the open. Extra information. Why do they treat me like this? It's a question I've found myself asking repeatedly throughout my life. As a child, when I inquired, they dismissed my concerns, accusing me of being spoiled, so I eventually stopped asking. But I've had plenty of time to form my own theories based on what I've observed. Here's what I think might be the reason I wasn't planned. They had struggled to conceive, and my sister was considered something of a miracle. Given the small age gap between us, it seems likely they didn't anticipate another child so soon. Or perhaps they simply didn't take adequate precautions. They were unprepared for another baby so quickly, especially while adjusting to life with a newborn. Financial strains probably didn't help, given our family wasn't particularly wealthy. Of course, this is all speculation. Ultimately, I realized that understanding their reasons won't change the past. What matters is acknowledging that whatever their motives, their treatment of me was unjustifiable. Did they really think their schemes at the wedding? After everything unfolded, my husband and I concluded that they probably never intended for their absurd proposal to be accepted. We suspect that my sister, frustrated by her own lack of romantic prospects, was upset about me marrying before her. My parents likely didn't want to finance my wedding and thought by offering a proposal we'd refuse, they could appear generous to her while saving face and money. But when my husband agreed to their terms, they were trapped by their own ruse, unable to back out without risking backlash. Thank you for tuning in. If you haven't already subscribed, I encourage you to do so and click the notification bell to stay informed about more astonishing real-life stories like this.